What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. This week we have a very unique case to go over. This is the kind of case I really like writing and talking about because it's not the run-of-the-mill story that you hear about every day. I have a feeling that this episode will be a bit polarizing to the audience, but we'll see. And because of that, I really want to know what you think about it in the comments, so please let me know. I would like to discuss this with you. It involves the talk show The Jenny Jones Show. There was an episode in 1995 titled Same Sex Secret Crushes, where two people would come on and one of those people would confess their love to the other. And of course, they were of the same sex. Two of the people on that episode were Johnathan Schmitz and Scott Amedure. 3 days after the episode was taped, Scott, he was not alive anymore. Without getting more into it at the moment, let's start the show. Scott Amedure was born on January 26, 1963, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Scott's father, Frank, was a truck driver, and his mother, Patricia, was a housewife. Scott had 3 brothers and a sister, and in 1968, the family moved to Waterford, Michigan. 2 years after this, when Scott was 7 years old, his parents got divorced, and the kids would mostly live with their father. Scott left high school at 17 years old, got his GED, and joined the Army. He was stationed in Germany, and after 3 years, he was honorably discharged. Frank Amedure, Scott's brother, says that the family found out Scott was gay when he was in the Army. And no one really had a problem with it, including his father, which is, back in the day, even now, some family members have big issues with that sort of thing. But at this time, most of his family didn't really mind. They didn't have anything to say about it, at least. And after the Army, Scott worked in the telecommunications field for a few years before he got work as a bartender. He enjoyed the nightlife, and it was during this time that Scott took in several of his gay friends who had AIDS, where he cared for them. He cared for them when not a lot of other people would. This was a bad time for that. People were being judged for it pretty harshly, and he would take in and sort of help out his friends that had AIDS. Now, Johnathan Schmitz was born on July 18th, 1970. He was 24 years old at the time of the incident, and he worked at a local bar named Fox and Hounds. Someone else in the story is named Donna Riley. She was friends with both Scott and Johnathan. Donna and Johnathan lived in the same apartment complex, which is how they became friends, and one of Scott's brothers lived there as well. Scott was walking to the apartment to visit his brother one day when he saw Johnathan working on Donna's car. Scott knew a decent amount about cars, and he knew electronics, that sort of thing, so he went over to help. This was the first time that Johnathan and Scott would meet. Johnathan, Scott, and Donna, they were 3 good friends after this. They would hang out a lot, they would go to bars, they would drink. And, Scott was out, he was open, so Johnathan knew he was gay, Donna obviously knew he was gay, and they all shared a very platonic relationship. Donna was friends with both of them, Johnathan was friends with Scott and Donna. They all had a very good, close relationship, and they would hang out often. Now, one day, Johnathan got a call from the Jenny Jones Show. This must have been pretty surreal. You get a call it's like getting a call from Jerry Springer almost. But they told him that someone had called them and told them that they had a crush on Johnathan. So someone had called the Jenny Jones Show and said, "Hey, I have a crush on Johnathan. Can we go on?" And they told Johnathan that it could be a man or a woman and asked if he wanted to come on the show to figure out who it was. And of course, Johnathan agreed. Not of course necessarily. Maybe he thinks that it's a woman. He doesn't really know. All he knows is he's going along with it. And I want to ask the audience, what would you do in this situation? If Jenny Jones or Maury or whatever, one of these shows, it was very popular in the 90s, but they still exist today. If they called you and they said, someone has a crush on you, come on our show to find out, what would you do? Do you think you'd go on there? I don't know if I would. I might. Kind of just depends. Maybe if they paid me. Either way, Scott was a big fan of the Jenny Jones Show, and he had seen an advertisement at the end of an episode for anyone who had a secret crush on someone of the same sex. It seems like Scott took this as an opportunity to maybe help push things further along in their relationship. Up until this time, of course, like I said, they had only been friends, but it seems like Scott wanted a little bit more. And to go into a little bit of history, the Jenny Jones Show started on September 16th, 1991. Honestly, this actually isn't a show I don't remember. I don't remember very well. I remember Springer, Ricky Lake, and Maury, of course, and all those. But for some reason, Jenny Jones doesn't ring a bell. And I don't really have any memories of it. I was born in 1990, so kind of grew up as a child with all those shows around me, but I don't remember this one. But it was a very similar show to all of the ones I listed. It kind of seems like it started off a little bit different, but would eventually move on to the more ambush style of TV. A lot of people call it trash TV, where there's a secret and it's revealed on the show, that sort of thing. And audience loved it, and I'm sure audience would have loved this episode too if it had actually aired on the time it was supposed to. So it was March 6, 1995, when Scott and Jonathan's episode was taped. Like I said, or like I hinted to a second ago, the show was never officially released, but it was shown during the trial. It starts off with Donna and Scott sitting next to each other on stage, and Jenny Jones is asking some questions. She asks Scott if there's any chance that Jonathan knows that Scott is gay, which of course he replies yes, because Jonathan does know that. She also asks if they know Jonathan's sexual orientation. And Scott replies, he's not gay, he's straight, but you never know. You never know what can happen. Jenny asks Scott what he likes about Jonathan and so on. And Scott basically just describes Jonathan, what he looks like, and says he's just very attracted to him, his physical appearance, that sort of thing. After this, they bring Jonathan out onto the stage. He was backstage. He was wearing these headphones that are sound resistant or whatever, so he couldn't hear what they were actually talking about. So he takes them off. He walks out stage. And at first, he kind of walks out and he kind of slow. He's walking a little bit fast when he first comes out. But when he notices that it's Scott and Donna sitting on the couch, because he didn't know who was going to be there, he kind of slows and he kind of looks at them. And you can tell he's like, what? And at first, you can't really tell who he thinks is there for as the crush. He can't tell if it's Scott or Donna who has the crush. And they all hug, and you can tell Jonathan is actually weirded out by the hug from Scott, because Scott kind of holds on to Jonathan a little bit too hard, a little bit too much, and he doesn't really hug him back very well. Then they show Jonathan a clip of Scott saying he would like to tie Jonathan up and perform sexual acts on him. And, So Jonathan looks obviously uncomfortable, but at the same time, he is smiling and clapping. He seems to be taking it pretty well on the outside, but in my opinion, you can see how uncomfortable he really is, but he's just trying to hide it. His smile is forced, and all of his movements seem nervous. He goes on to say that he is 100% heterosexual. The episode as a whole, it's not violent, no threats are exchanged, but Scott actually seems to be taking the rejection pretty well at first, at least on camera. You can tell he's a bit uncomfortable now as well. He's, when they first showed, before Jonathan came out, Scott, he had a smile on his face. He was kind of laughing and talking to Jenny Jones. But then right when Jonathan comes out, obviously he shuts down, he gets really nervous, and everything about him changes. But Jonathan later says that the producers implied that the secret crush was a woman. And also when Jenny Jones tells him that it's actually Scott that has the crush, Jonathan replies by saying, "Oh, you lied to me." And it wasn't a pretty playful tone, but still, it seems like Jonathan did go to the show hoping it would be a woman. And I guess that makes sense, because that's what's going to go on in his head. He's not going to go there thinking it's going to be a man, right? And it's, like I said, Jonathan, a producer or someone told Jonathan that, or at least implied that it was going to be a woman and not a man. So he seems very taken back, very surprised, and he's not having it. He looks very uncomfortable. He is smiling, he's laughing. At one point he puts his, hands over his face, but at the same time, a lot of people smile and laugh when they're nervous and they're uncomfortable, and you can tell he's trying to hide it. 3 days later, Jonathan took money from his bank and went and bought a shotgun, and he shot Scott twice in the chest inside his own home. But what happened between the taping of the episode and the murder? Let's get into that. After the taping of the show, all three of them decided to fly home together. That night, all three of them went out together and drank at a local bar, and after they got done at the bar, it said all three went back to Donna's house to continue the party. Scott told friends of his that he and Jonathan had a sexual encounter, but later in trial, Donna would deny that this ever happened. She does say that Scott was being very touchy-feely with Jonathan. And, this is after, obviously, Jonathan has, he was shown his discomfort. But at the same time, they all went out to party together. So I guess In Jonathan's eyes, maybe they were still trying to be friends. In Scott's eyes, maybe he saw an opportunity because, maybe that's just the way he was thinking. 3 days after the taping, Scott left a sexually fueled note on Jonathan's front door step. And Donna says that the note was supposed to be a joke, but that note is what is said to have set Jonathan off. Jonathan showed up to Scott's mobile home. He went up to the home to confront Scott without the weapon. And after some words were exchanged between the two of them, Jonathan went back to the car to get the gun. Jonathan walked up to the front door with his gun pointed up towards the sky, not pointed towards Scott. Scott started freaking out, of course, and grabbed a wicker chair that was in his living room and held it out in front of him with the feet facing out in sort of a defensive stance. Scott's roommate was there and confirmed that this all happened. Jonathan shot Scott twice in the chest. After Jonathan left Scott's home, he got in his car and drove to a payphone and called 911.
Okay. Okay, why did you do that?
So the defense claimed that because Scott picked up this chair and acted like he was going to throw it, Jonathan had the right to shoot him, which is just insane. But when you hear the defense attorney talk about this on camera, he says, and I quote, "If anyone was asking to be killed that day," end quote. The defense attorney actually says that Scott asked to be killed that day. I mean, not literally, but he's just saying that he deserved to be killed because he was defending himself with the only thing that he had at the time. The defense claims that Scott should not have acted threatened when Jonathan showed up with a gun, but instead should have apologized for pushing him to that point. Even though Jonathan got money out of his bank, went down to the gun shop, bought the gun, went all the way to Scott's mobile home, with what exact intention? I mean, if that doesn't spell out the intent that Jonathan had, I don't know what does. The trial for this case was a sensational one. It was covered and broadcast by Court TV. It was actually a really, really big deal on TV. The defense attorneys brought in experts that claimed that Jonathan suffered from bipolar disorder and depression. They claimed that he suffered from manic episodes and grave disease as well, which is what, at least in part, caused him to commit the homicide. The defense would use something called the gay panic defense. The gay panic defense is basically the claim that a person could commit an act of violence while they are temporarily insane because of unwanted same-sex advances. And this is insane. I mean, I don't know. I would like to know what you let me know about this as well. This is one of those episodes I want to get a lot of comments. I want to know what you guys think about this one because I think people are, not everyone might agree on everything that is, that this case is, that I'm saying right now. The defense brought up Jonathan's childhood, claiming that his father was abusive and would punish him severely for small offenses. They claimed that a lot of his early childhood abuse would lead to his diminished mental state, and it would make his mental state fragile. They also claimed for years that he had attempted suicide multiple times. The defense said that because he was so mentally fragile, everything that happened between he and Scott triggered this to happen. And I mean, I don't know. That's definitely what Jonathan's family thought as well. Jonathan's family would really, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but they would really blame the Jenny Jones show because they believed that Jonathan was a very mentally fragile. He wasn't doing so well, and that all of this pushed him to this point. Obviously, that's a very subjective thing to believe, but. And more on that point, I mean, part of what they were saying was that how Scott acted after the taping, with the notes and basically telling his friends that they had a sexual encounter, led to this happening in so many words. That's what they were trying to say. They also claimed that the humiliation of being on the Jenny Jones show caused this as well. Now, look, a lot of people think that Jonathan's father was homophobic. And, he had used the gay slur that starts with an F more than once. I don't want to say it because, for one thing, I just don't like the word, and also YouTube might punish me for it. But you know what I'm talking about. The defense says a memory of Jonathan's father punishing him in front of the classroom when he was a child was brought back into his head, basically, and that was in part for why Johnathan had the temporary lack of insanity. Basically, they're saying that when Johnathan was humiliated on the Jenny Jones show, it brought back a memory from when he was a child, from when his father humiliated him in front of classmates. But remember that Johnathan didn't plead insanity, but that is just something that's part of what the defense was going with. And I want to remind everyone right now, because sometimes it might become confusing. I'm not saying I agree with anything the defense is saying. I'm not saying that I don't either. I'm just giving an explanation on what they said. And I think we can all see where the prosecution was with this case in the trial. And I have a question for you again. Do you believe Johnathan should be charged with first-degree murder, which shows premeditation, or should he be charged with second-degree murder, which shows a lack of premeditation, but that it was deliberate? So before we go further, take a second to pause. Let me know in the comments, and we'll see. But, it's interesting, though, because the state had an oral and videotaped confession of, what he did by Johnathan, but they were both deemed inadmissible in court. The oral was because Johnathan wasn't read his Miranda rights, and the videotape because it was recorded while his right to counsel was being violated. So pretty big mistakes made, early on. The prosecutors were trying to get a first-degree murder charge, but the defense was able to get it down to a second-degree murder charge. Johnathan was convicted and sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison. This conviction would actually be overturned on appeal, but when it went back to trial, the outcome and sentencing was exactly the same. Again, I want to know how you feel about that sentence. And Jonathan's father claims that his son was a victim too. Scott's brother Frank actually agrees to a certain extent. Something that both families can agree on is that everyone was a victim of the Jenny Jones TV show. They all say that no one should have been in the position in the first place. And that brings us to the next part in this. Scott's family sued Warner Brothers and the Jenny Jones show. Scott's brother Frank blames the producers of the Jenny Jones show as much as he blames Johnathan, honestly. He says this. Scott's family sued Warner Brothers and the Jenny Jones show for $50 million. And this is something that's kind of interesting, actually. I said earlier that Court TV was covering the trial, the original trial, trying to decide if, Johnathan was guilty or not, and what he was guilty of, actually. And Court TV was owned by Warner Brothers. So it's interesting because the family was suing the same company that was making money off of airing and publicizing the trial. And this is something that, Frank, Scott's brother, did not like very much, obviously. The family hired well-known lawyer Jeffrey Feigler, who had been Jack Kevorkian's defense lawyer. Jack Kevorkian was an American pathologist and euthanasia proponent that was convicted of second-degree murder in 1998. He actually served 8 years on a 10 to 25 sentence and released on parole. He was a proponent of the terminally ill patient's right to die by physician-assisted suicide. It's a very interesting case we will most likely cover soon in the future. And just to let you know, Jeffrey Feigler was also Kanika Jenkins' family defense lawyer. She was Kanika Jenkins. That's a long. Just Google Kanika Jenkins. It's a very interesting case. She was partying with some friends at a hotel, and she got caught. She got stuck in a freezer. That's one I would love to go over with as well. But Feigler was known for being an aggressive and honestly sometimes arrogant lawyer. Feigler's, and I say arrogant lawyer. You just have to watch videos of this guy. Obviously, he's very intelligent, but yeah, like I said, he's kind of arrogant the way he speaks, but he's very confident, and that's just the way he is. Feigler's opening statement to the Jenny Jones trial was 2.5 hours long. The cross-examination of the Jenny Jones show and the producers was trying to prove that the producers' intent was to humiliate Johnathan and Scott, and that they didn't care about the outcome of what happened as long as the show and Warner Brothers made money. When Feigler got into cross-examination with Jenny Jones, it started off a little bit in the favor of Jenny, honestly, but that turned around pretty quickly. And look, watching Feigler cross-examine in court is interesting. He's aggressive. I Actually, it seemed, I don't know anything, I don't know that much about this sort of thing. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, but he seemed pretty good to me when I was watching the videos. He was really able to get under Jenny Jones' skin and trip her up on her answers. And, the entire time she's smiling and she's on top of it, but then he really starts asking some questions that really, yeah, like I said, she can't really answer. And it's interesting to watch. Jenny Jones' attorney team in this trial truly believed that this was an open and shut case, that there was no way that the show could be legally and financially responsible for the death of Scott, even if they were morally wrong. And I say that because when you watch the attorney for, Warner Brothers and the Jenny Jones show, he does say this. He does say that maybe morally they were not correct. Maybe they did what they did was not right. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they were legally responsible for the death of Scott. Look, Jenny Jones was an American, quote unquote, trash TV. I quote that because it's not a term I made up, obviously. It's a lot of people say that. And that's not supposed to be a judgment. It's just supposed to say that it's pretty easy to see that the morals of a show like the Jenny Jones show are not exactly the best. However, does that mean they should be legally responsible for what happened? Again, another question that I can ask you, and let me know. What do you think? I mean, this family sued Jenny Jones and Warner Brothers for the death of Scott. It's interesting to think about, was that something that they should have done? But you know what? The jury believed the answer to that question was yes, 8-9, and awarded the family $25 million. However, this would be something that the family would not be able to celebrate for very long. 3 years after the jury awarded the family the money, the ruling was overturned by the Michigan Court of Appeals 2-1. And I'll say, they never saw any type of financial reward. They never saw any type of financial gain or whatever for this. I mean, that it was overturned during the time. They obviously didn't get the money, so they never saw any money. And that's something, again, it's pretty interesting to me. Look, I'll say this. I don't personally think, I think what Jenny Jones and what the Jenny Jones show did, and honestly, in a general sense, what they do, what those type of shows do, is wrong, and what they did to Johnathan was wrong. And to a certain extent, you could say Johnathan was definitely a victim in the beginning, but he did agree to go on the show. Again, he says that it was implied that the secret crush was a woman. And that's subjective. How do we know exactly? We don't know what that phone call from Jenny Jones to Johnathan was like. We don't know exactly what they said, and we don't know what the producers said exactly to Johnathan. So, how do we know what exactly was implied? The producers were brought under cross-examination by Feigler, but basically Feigler was just trying to get them to admit that they humiliated Johnathan. So not necessarily that they implied it was going to be a woman. So it's kind of interesting to know. Like I said, I would like to know your thoughts on that. I mean, do you think that the family should have been awarded something? And it's just an interesting trial. It's the whole thing is just crazy. This whole case to me it's another one of those cases that I got really, really into. And I was supposed to release this episode next week, but I decided to release it today because I had already written all of it. I'd gotten really into it this week, and I just really wanted to get it out there. Now, something for the end here. After 22 years, Johnathan was released from prison in 2017. 3 years ago. He was 47. He's 50 years old now. And what do you think about that? He was released from prison. So Scott's dead. Johnathan's out. The media is kind of hounding him a little bit. There's videos of people trying to question Johnathan, but he's out. And Scott's still dead. And I want to know what you guys think about that. It's crazy. So here's what I want to say. We're pretty much at the end of the episode, but I want to say a few things. Look, Scott, I do not think handled it correctly. Now, look, I'm not trying to victim blame. I do not think Scott deserved to die. I think after the taping of the episode, what should have happened is they all should have went on with their lives being friends. But here's the thing, even if Scott didn't tell people that he and Johnathan had gotten together, even if Scott didn't leave the sexual note, how do we know what Johnathan would have done 3 days later? A lot of people think that Johnathan was raised in a homophobic household. And the world is a little bit different. And nowadays, it would still be humiliating to be asked if you were gay on national TV, but I feel like it would have been a little bit different in the 90s. And Johnathan was very humiliated. Again, this is not victim blaming. I think Johnathan acted, it was 3 days after it. Obviously, he went too far, and Scott did not deserve to die. So, but to me, it brings up the question: should Johnathan have gotten life in prison? And I personally say yes. The intent is there. He could have went to Scott's house and on that third day and told him, "Look, this just happened, but you know how I feel. You know that I am a straight man and I'm not into you like this. So please leave it alone," or what, whatever he wants to say. But no, he went to the store, he bought the gun, he bought the ammunition, and he killed Scott. And to me, again, that shows intent. That shows premeditation. It wasn't like right after the taping of the episode, he immediately killed him. I think he had some time to premeditate it a little bit. But at the same time, these are just my opinions. I don't know for sure. It's kind of hard to say, and that's why I want to have a conversation with you. But yeah, like I said, this was a very interesting case. Thank you for listening to this. And soon we're going to cover the Yorkshire Ripper. That will be an interesting one. Thank you very much.
Must be destroyed.